And Shalom, welcome, my friends and neighbors, for the second in our series of our Muslim-Jewish dialogue talking about Israel. For those of you who are not here last week, this is our second of a series that began really last year as the Howard County Muslim Council and Beth Shalom began a dialogue about the history that we shared, our differences and commonalities in our religious beliefs, and what we could do together to combat extremism in our communities. And from that series, we realized that there was one thing we were not talking about. Every time we'd come up to it, we'd have to say, oh, too controversial, we can't deal with that because we can't build our relationship if we touch it. And that was the discussion about Israel, Palestine, and the peace process. And we made a commitment at the end of that dialogue series last year, those of you who were here with us remember, to find a way to have a conversation and to model a way to have that conversation in a civil and respectful way that would help develop understanding between the Jewish and Muslim communities, and also model civil discourse around a very hot topic. And so I want to thank all of our partners this evening who've been participating in creating this series, particularly the Baltimore Jewish Council, who's been so critical in putting our program together, Israel Bonds, who's always been a partner with us, and especially our local partners and our friends, the Howard County Muslim Council, and many other partners as well, including the Howard County Jewish Federation. We have a number of dignitaries here this evening. I want to recognize them. Of course, our partner and friend, the president of the Howard County Muslim Council, Rizwan Siddiqui, and we welcome you guys back from Florida. And we also welcome the Secretary General, or the General Secretary of our local Islamic Center, the Taqwa, Arif Ayub, so we welcome you as well. We welcome our Israel Bonds partners, Alan Dorenfeld, the director of the Baltimore region of Israel Bonds, and our friend Ayelet Weiss, who's no stranger here. I saw our immediate past president of Howard County Federation is here, Perlofer, and our executive director of Howard County Federation, Michelle Ostroff. So it's wonderful to see you all here as well. Of course, we recognize our Beth Shalom Adult Education Committee, here represented by our Vice President, Tammy Lawrence. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome back to the Bima Martha Wyman, who is the the lay director of the Baltimore Jewish Council's Jewish-Muslim Dialogue, who's going to be president. Is that your title? Chairperson? No?
It's okay.
I don't have your
She's
title.
immediate past president.
Immediate past president.
Right.
I didn't get the notes today, so I don't know. But it's great to have you back, and certainly on the council, to introduce our speakers for this evening. Following their introductory statements, we will have some back and forth from them, and then we will have time for questions and answers and a discussion with the audience. We also want to thank Mandy from the Baltimore Jewish Council, who has been doing all the legwork in addition to my adult ed committee here. So thank you so much for your work. Martha, it's all yours.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Rabbi Grossman. This evening, we welcome our panelists, Dr. Ralph Nurnberger and Harris Terran, as well as our moderator, Dr. Arthur Abramson. Dr. Ralph Nurnberger is Professor of International Relations at Georgetown University, where he has taught since 1975. Dr. Nurnberger has served on Capitol Hill on the professional staff of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and has spent 30 years in government relations. He has also advised numerous congressional, senatorial, and presidential campaigns on foreign policy issues, especially those related to the Middle East. He served for more than 8 years as a legislative liaison for the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, better known to most of you as AIPAC. He was the first director of Builders for Peace. In this capacity, he dealt with international leaders, including Israel's then Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, then Foreign Minister Shimon Peres, and PLO Chairman Yasser Arafat. Dr. Ralph Nurnberger comes to us courtesy of Israel Bonds. Harris Taryn is currently the director of the Washington, D.C. office of the Muslim Public Affairs Council, MPAC. He was raised and educated in Southern California, where he received his undergraduate education and is currently pursuing his graduate work in Washington, D.C. In his capacity as the D.C. director of MPAC, he engages various agencies within government, including the White House, Department of Justice, State Department, Department of Homeland Security, and offices on Capitol Hill. He was among 3 leading young Americans President Barack Obama called in a one-of-its-kind discussion on public policy issues. The president called and met with him specifically to discuss policies pertaining to national security, countering violent extremism, the American Muslim community, and civic engagement. Mr. Taryn has been published in various national and international publications, including the LA Times, CNN, Washington Post, and has a regular column with the Huffington Post. He has spoken at various domestic and international conferences and media outlets on topics such as national security, Islam and governance, U.S. Muslim-world relations, role of the American Muslim institutions in policy formation, religion and public life, and civic engagement. Dr. Art Abramson, Executive Director of the Baltimore Jewish Council since 1990, was previously the Community Relations Director for the Jewish Federation of Greater Houston. Prior to that, he was the Washington State Area Director for the American Jewish Committee, AJC. He also served as Assistant Area Director for the AJC in its Los Angeles office. Before joining the American Jewish Committee, he taught political science for 4 years at the University of California at Los Angeles and the California State University at Northridge. His areas of expertise include the international relations and politics of the Middle East, American foreign policy, and American government. A native of New York City, he attended Queens College of the City University of New York, where he received his BA degree. He earned his MA and PhD degrees at UCLA in the field of political science. And we're going to begin with Dr. Nurnberger.
Martha, thank you. Would obviously like to thank Rabbi Grossman for bringing me back. It was a pleasure to be here in the spring, and the Israel Bonds folks for being kind enough to arrange for me to come. It is a delight to spend the evening with Art and with Harris. Harris and I live in walking distance from each other, so the next time we do this, you folks should come and visit us.
Meet at the mall.
No, meet at the mall, meet at Tyson's Corner, which is
Right.
closer to us. When I saw the topic for tonight, I was reminded of a quote that has been attributed to lots of people, including Winston Churchill, and that is, "I simply don't understand the Middle East. I don't understand why the Jews and the Muslims can't solve their problems like good Christians." As we will discuss tonight, 2 questions have bedeviled mankind for the last 70 or 80 years. The first is, why did Japanese kamikaze pilots wear helmets? And the second is, will there ever be peace in the Middle East? So I think we're going to spend the next hour discussing helmets. When I look at the situation today, particularly with regard to the peace process between the Israelis and the Palestinians, I'm reminded that the definition of a pessimist is someone who says things are so bad they cannot get worse, and an optimist is someone who says, of course they can. And at least for the next few weeks, of course they can. When you look at the current negotiations that are taking place between the Israelis and the Palestinians, what I thought I would do is provide a a little bit of historic background on how we got to where we are, explain why there is some room for optimism, and then leave you all depressed. My wife, who is with us tonight, will not let me talk at parties. She says, I depress people and they walk away from me. So that will probably be how I will end my comments. In quick background, if someone had told me 5 years ago, when President Obama first came to office, or 4.5, whatever it is, that in his first term he would accomplish almost nothing in terms of bringing the Israelis and the Palestinians closer to peace, I would have said that's nonsense. He got off to such a strong start. In his inaugural address in January of 2009, he listed Arab-Israeli peace as one of his foreign policy priorities. On day 2 of his presidency, he announced former Senate Majority Leader George Mitchell would be the chief negotiator for the United States, a role that had been empty for basically 8 years during the Bush Jr. period, and before that was handled in Bush Sr. and in Clinton by Dennis Ross. Hillary Clinton's first trip as Secretary of State was to the region. Obama's first foreign policy major addresses dealt with this topic, first in Turkey and then, of course, in Cairo. And so it seemed that this was something that was very much on his mind, that he wanted this to proceed. And yet, in his first 4 years, there were scant talks between the Israelis and the Palestinians, in large measure or in part because the Obama administration overstressed the need for Israel to cease settlement expansion and building. The Israelis at first would not do this, and then when they did and had a 10-month cessation, Mohammed Abbas, Abu Mazen, the president of the Palestinian Authority, basically wasted 8 months before he and Netanyahu finally started talking. And then once they started talking, everyone said, isn't this wonderful? We're going to accomplish something. And Netanyahu said, you know, you only have another month before we start building again. And Abbas says, well, can't you keep the freeze going for a while? And Netanyahu said no. And so the freeze ended, as did the talking. And so, summarizing 4 years of the first term of Obama on Palestinian-Israeli peace, very little was accomplished. He was also undermined by the less than cordial relations that he and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu had, which again did not further the overall peace process. Coming into the second term, Obama decided to try again. And this time he went to Israel on March 20th. And the first thing he decided to do was to improve relations with Netanyahu. And that he realized that he could not push a peace between Israel and the Palestinians if Netanyahu was going to object to everything. Obama gets off the plane, he walks down the red carpet and grabs Mrs. Netanyahu and yanks her between himself and Bibi and says, now the photographers can take a picture of a rose between two thorns. That set the stage for a series of atmospheric differences between the first Obama administration and the second. He made a point to visit the Shrine of the Book, which is where the Dead Sea Scrolls were kept, because in his Cairo speech, some people had misinterpreted his comments on the Holocaust, thinking that Obama thought that Israel grew out of the Holocaust. By going to see where the Dead Sea Scrolls were, it was to say, I understand that Jews have a 2,000-year history with this place. He went to the tomb of Theodor Herzl, the gravesite of Theodor Herzl, and placed a stone on it that had been taken from the Martin Luther King Memorial in Washington. So the atmospherics were quite different. Rather than speaking at the Knesset, he decided to speak to 2,000 young people and told them basically that peace is possible, it is doable, it is essential, and you must do what you can. He then met with Abbas and said, it is time for you to come and begin to talk with the Israelis. And in order to try and get these talks going, he then appointed newly selected and confirmed Secretary of State John Kerry to take on this role. Kerry, on his first day as Secretary of State on February 5th of this year, when he spoke to people at the State Department, announced that Israeli-Palestinian peace would be one of his top priorities. But it was necessary for Obama to pass the mantle to Kerry in the March trip to Israel. And Kerry readily accepted this. He has made 7 or 8 trips to the region, basically trying to set forth talks. That said, both the Israelis and the Palestinians are extremely skeptical about whether these talks have any chance of success. In the most recent polling data that I have seen, and there may have come out more recent since, 69% of Israelis favor peace negotiations between Israelis and Palestinians that ultimately will lead to a two-state solution. However, 65% don't believe it will work. And on the Palestinians, 52% want the talks to keep trying, 68% want a two-state solution through negotiations, and 70% feel that they will fail. So everyone wants it, but no one believes it's going to happen. So let's start by looking a little bit at why these might work, and then look a little bit more at why they might not. First of all, there are a number of factors that are quite different this time. One of the most significant that tends to be overlooked is a meeting that took place in Washington on April 30th, when the Arab League foreign ministers came to tell the Obama administration that the Saudi peace plan, which was first offered in March of 2002, could be used as the start of negotiations rather than the end of negotiations. That is an enormously significant change from the Arab League. Essentially, the Saudi peace plan calls for Israel to return all of the territories gained in the '67 war, for the refugees to be, the Palestinian refugees who left as a result of the '47 to '49 war, to be able to return to Israel, that these are talking points for the beginning, that it would be possible to come up with new borders based on what Obama called the '67 lines with land swaps, which essentially is the same position as the Clinton parameters. It is the same position that Bush called for, yet when Obama called for it, people said somehow that this was a brand new idea. It was not. So the Saudi peace plan being accepted by the Arab League as the beginning of negotiations is a huge step forward. Next step forward, Kerry announced that the negotiations themselves would take 9 months. One of my friends said, other things take 9 months, and maybe this is quite similar. No editorial comment there. But by basically saying 9 months, Kerry was handing a stick of dynamite to the Israelis and a stick of dynamite to the Palestinians, and said, this is going to explode in your face in 9 months unless you do something about it. And now get together and start doing something. Next step that was important was that the talks would be carried out in secret, in private, that no one would talk to the press, and that this was a major step forward. You're not going to negotiate on C-SPAN or CNN. You're going to negotiate in private, and if you come up with a deal, come up and tell us about it. Very significant change. In fact, Kerry was asked, he was in Israel last week, and he was asked, how are the talks going? And he said, I'm the one who said no one's going to talk about it, and I'm not going to break that pledge. And that's quite significant. Next thing that was significant, the talks are being carried out not by Netanyahu and Abbas, but one level down. On the Israeli side, by Tzipi Livni, the justice minister, and since Netanyahu cannot stand her and also does not trust her, his personal lawyer and close friend, Yitzhak Molko, is there to make sure that Livni does not give away the store. And on the Palestinian side, Saab Erekat, who has been doing this for 30 years, I've met with him quite a number of times when I was doing this in the '90s. He is as talented and as bright and as capable as anyone on the Palestinian side to do this. The next thing was that there would be an economic incentive. He was able to find Israelis and Palestinians who pledged $4 billion should there be an agreement to improve the quality of the Palestinian economy, so that at the end the Palestinians would be less likely to be a recipient state of aid, but would be able to have jobs and so forth. And in fact, last week when Kerry was in the region. In Bethlehem, he pledged an additional $75 million in aid to the Palestinians for roads, hospitals, and other infrastructure projects, and to create the jobs involved in doing this. Then he appointed two very talented people on the United States side to serve as the diplomats. My former office mate and good friend, Martin Indig, former U.S. ambassador to the region, former Assistant Secretary of State, who, by the way, had to give up his Australian citizenship to become a U.S. ambassador, is the chief negotiator for the U.S. Could not find anyone better. And former General John Allen, only there to deal with security issues. Couldn't do any better. So this is all the good news. That said, we've got problems. First, anyone who didn't expect problems isn't paying attention. We've seen this movie before. Essentially, if you have 9 months, the first 3 months are going to be wasted. You're going to discuss what order should the issues be taken up. And by the way, there are only 4 issues. There are hundreds of issues. Water, environment, passports, visas, bank accounts, forget them all. If you solve the core 4 issues, and those are borders, what should the borders be between Israel and a Palestinian entity if it is created? Second, security, to ensure that an Israeli mother can put her kid on a bus and not worry that the kid's going to get blown up on the way to school, and a Palestinian woman who is pregnant isn't going to be stopped so many times by security guards that she winds up giving birth on the road, so that both sides feel secure in their daily lives. Third issue, refugees, which the Palestinians refer to as the right of return, a term that they deliberately stole from the United States Bill of Rights. They view this as their primary right to return. Is there a way of them to get out of refugee camps and into proper housing and better quality of life? And finally, the fate of some city. The name escapes me. I don't have my notes handy, but it rhymes with Jerusalem. Is there a way of coming up with a way so that both sides can claim victory on the future of Jerusalem? Because if both sides don't claim victory, if one walks away unhappy on Jerusalem, the whole deal will fall apart. So those are the 4 issues. Now, why is there skepticism? Well, there's skepticism for a number of reasons. First of all, both the Israelis and the Palestinians have people who do not want this deal to work, period. On the Israeli side, you have the settler movement, you have the Israeli right wing, you have various religious groups that do not want an agreement. And in fact, some in the Israeli cabinet have said any agreement will cause them to drop out of the cabinet, which is going to create a problem. Then, on the Palestinian side, you have Hamas, which doesn't even want the negotiations, let alone an agreement. So these are major problems that have to be overcome in terms of skepticism. To make it worse, both sides are now behaving badly. The Israelis, as part of the agreement to get the talks going, agreed to release 104 Palestinian prisoners, people who were not in prison for jaywalking. These are murderers and people who have committed acts of terrorism prior to 1993. They are being released in 4 tranches of 26. And obviously this is creating tremendous anguish in Israel. To try and alleviate this and to make the Israeli right wing feel more comfortable, Netanyahu announced in the same week that the last prisoners were to be announced that there would be an additional 1,300 new settlement apartment units built in the West Bank and an additional 700 in Jerusalem. So again, this is another problem. To make matters worse, on the Israeli side, the leader of the Russian party, Yisrael Beitenu, Avigdor Lieberman, was declared innocent by a court this week, and he will now rejoin the cabinet as foreign minister, and he is, of course, opposed to any deal with the Palestinians. He lives in the West Bank and believes, again, this should be part of Israel. So there's tremendous problems in terms of both sides, and I've probably gone over my time.
Yeah, why don't you just wrap it up and then we'll come back.
Okay, well, I will stop here. I think that gives, well, I'll give one more reason for skepticism. In 2008, then Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert made an offer to Abbas, in which Abbas was offered 95+% of the West Bank, some form of compensation and resolution of the refugee problem, a division of Jerusalem, and Abbas turned it down. There is no way that Netanyahu will make as generous an offer, and there is no way that Abbas can accept less. And so the maximum that Israel will offer is not the minimum of what the Palestinians can accept. And so are we going to see a peace deal in April? I don't know. And the biggest flaw, the note to end on, both Netanyahu and Abbas are making a major mistake. And the mistake is they are not preparing their own people for an agreement. If suddenly the negotiators come up with an agreement, if they find the perfect borders, if they find the solution to refugees, if they divide Jerusalem in a way that everybody walks away happy, if everybody feels secure and there's no more terrorism on the paper, the deal still won't sell. Because you need the people. Tip O'Neill's all politics is local, and neither Netanyahu nor Abbas right now are making the case to their own people why such a deal is in their own interests. And that's what they should be doing right now publicly.
Thank you. Harris.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Nurnberger. Definitely would not be able to give you a succinct history of the whole Middle East in 15 minutes, so thank you for doing that. And thank you, Rabbi Grossman, for having me here. What I will do is kind of take a step back. I want to take a step back and zoom out a little bit, and rather than talk about the politics and policy of the peace process, is to talk about some of the roadblocks that you ended with. You talked about neither President Abbas or Netanyahu are preparing their people for peace. And I want to build off of that point that you made there. And I want to talk about the shared experiences of these two people, two civilizations, two very rich histories that are intertwined in a small piece of land. And talk about some of the roadblocks that don't allow for that peace to eventually go through, or for that peace to actually take hold. And I want to use a case study that we did in Los Angeles amongst American Muslims and Arab American, Palestinian Americans, and Jewish Americans. We developed in about 2006, we developed a fellowship of American Jews and American Muslims and American Palestinians called the New Ground Fellowship. And New Ground was a way to start to talk about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict in a way that was civil, that was beyond the political discourse, that was beyond the media hype and the sound bites that we usually hear this conflict through the lens of. And so what we did was we decided that we'd bring together for 16 weeks, navigate those different identities, professionals, these groups of ground in Jerusalem, Gaza, and he had conversations, essentially cook the same food, eat with passion. Really happen that they can somehow find a way for that addresses the anxieties and fears that we have these conversations, and I can because there's been peace processes before peoples in both communities, and they have built certain security keep out any foreign are in our favor. We're eventually peace process in any way succeeding place amongst the Croats, the Serbs, Balkans. So I think the same applies, and it must be built into that with. You are not from Gaza. They don't in the peace process. And for people, as we said, to accept that. That's what happens. If you can't visit with them regularly, you've got, in terms of the narrative that we're listening to as Americans, who are able to potentially sabotage very far-right Christian groups, speaking to a group of individuals who are and marginalizing the extreme and the
succinct present plays in insurance commercial. And what is that element? That in the end, Israeli.
I don't know if any of you saw this. This guy went into are talking to Iran in Geneva. Number 3, Iran. And then negotiations with Iran make less concessions on the Palestinian conflict. I'm reminded of it being a divorce because you're both right. However, the negotiator who has dealt with this problem, Yair Hirschfeld, The Palestinians refer to it as the Yom Kippur War. And you could just go down, taken over the dialogue. If 70%, the extremists get a hold of
Self.